Greetings to all my friends, subscribers, and even those who aren't friends. Stepanets is back with you on the air. As always, we show you hidden places and reclaim the history that was once stolen from us. Today we'll be walking through the nostalgic places of my childhood, just as I think many Kyivans would. By request of our subscriber Dmitry Shastel, my sincere apologies if I put the stress on your last name incorrectly. We still remember this problem from our school days, when teachers would constantly butcher our last names and never mark the stresses. Today, we'll be strolling through Syretsky Park, one of the Syretsky parks in the area of the Children's Railway. In my opinion, it's one of the best places to relax in Kyiv. Today, it's still spring outside, everything is lush, green, fragrant, blooming, and it's not hot, yet the leaves haven't been scorched by the sun. That's why today we'll be walking around this area. Let's talk again about the Syrets area, because it's actually very sprawling, I'd even say vast. We'll discuss one of its smaller aspects. This is the Children's Railway Park. It used to be called the Park of the 40th Anniversary of October. I don't know what that name refers to, because the park itself was established earlier than the 40th anniversary of October, which, as is known, took place in 1957. Now it's called Syretsky Park, which creates a bit of confusion. Since we have several Syretsky parks cut off in different parts of the Shevchenkivsky and Podilsky districts, there are quite a few, at least several. This causes some confusion. Yes, there's Dubki Park, there's Syrets Park, and then there's Syretsky Park, the Children's Railway. There's also the Syretsky Dendro Park, so it's a very green area. I really like it. I actually spent the first years of my life here, those early childhood years, so to speak, and I hope to live here again someday. We'll be talking about the park itself, the Children's Railway, and everything around it. There are a lot of unique and diverse sites here, starting with the famous viaduct the size of a 5-story building. There probably isn't a viaduct like this for a children's railway anywhere else in the world, but we have one here in Kyiv, and everything around it too. There are places here that are both interesting and at the same time somewhat tragic. And today we'll be taking a detailed look at their history, and we'll just have a relaxed walk as well. A significant reconstruction of this park was recently carried out here. It has changed for the better. It's become much more beautiful and well organized here. So we'll enjoy our walk, watch until the end. There will be a lot of interesting things. As always, don't switch away, and let's get started. But first, friends, before we start exploring the Syrets area, Syretsky Park, and enjoying the beauty of the local parks, the lands of the Children's Railway, the landscape, architecture, and history, I strongly urge you to subscribe to our family channel, because every subscription is a contribution to the history of Ukraine, to the development of Ukrainian history, to nurturing our historical heritage, and to the restoration and preservation of Kyiv's architectural sites and parks. Because by highlighting these problems, we still hope that someone at the top will take notice and things will start to improve. So be sure to subscribe to Stepans and pray. Recommend it to all your friends, everyone you can, and they'll recommend it to all of theirs. And that's how it should be. Everyone in Kyiv should subscribe to me. Just like everyone now has the Kyiv digital app, everyone should also have Kyiv Stepansit. Share, comment, add your thoughts, and correct me if needed. The main thing is, don't just walk by and don't remain indifferent to our history and my humble attempts to save it, revive it, and share it with the masses. You can also donate to help us develop Ukrainian YouTube, as long as it doesn't hurt your wallet, and most importantly, your support for our glorious armed forces. All donations should go first and foremost to the armed forces, then to yourself and your loved ones. And whatever is left, you can even send Stepanets some money for coffee. The poor guy. That's it. So, let's get started. Watch until the end. And if you do watch to the end, be sure to let me know, because not everyone can put up with me, I know. And we are starting... The foundation is first toponymy, meaning the name of the place itself and its etymology. And accordingly, also the scale of the research, that is, their boundaries. After all, you can't grasp the ungraspable. That's why we have so many episodes and they're all about Kyiv. One day we'll cover all of Kyiv and start filming about something bigger. That's it. But for now, our blog is, for the most part, Kyiv-centric, though with an eye to the future. So the place is called Syrets. The name is pretty self-explanatory. It's connected to moisture, to dampness. It's really very damp here. Right now I'm walking through these thickets and it's quite humid, but I'm currently in the area of Upper Syrets. In the old days, they actually distinguished between places called First Syrets and Second Syrets. So right now I'm in the area of Syrets number 1, which is closer to the central part of our glorious city. So the name Syrets is connected to the numerous streams that flow here, including one of the longest small rivers in Kyiv District, which starts in the Nivki metro area and flows into Lake Kirilivsky in Obolon, thus forming a huge ravine. And apparently it was this hydronym that gave the area its name. There are also some alternative versions. These are more about Syretsky Street. In one of our previous episodes, I talked about brick extraction and the brick factories where bricks were made from Syrets clay. This is also possibly one of the origins of the name. And in general, the word Syrets in Kyiv is quite polysemous. It's also a metro station, a residential area, the Syretsky Hutri, the Syrets Industrial Park, and a whole series of streets that include the name Syretska or Syretsko Parkova. This is an old dance floor. As I understand it, a new one was built on its site. There used to be an abandoned, overgrown dance floor here. If I'm not mistaken, they built this stage on its site. Well, here's the stage. Well, I guess I should probably use this stage for its intended purpose. Very cool. Today I have a whole huge stage at my disposal and there are no people around. It's drizzling. May is very wet, very much like April. If it weren't for all the different grasses and the greenery and the warm temperature, that's it. And that's why I'm going to use this stage. Today it will be a theater of one actor and one spectator. In old times, the Syrets River cut through here and it still exists now as a small stream. You can see it out in the open near the Syrets metro station. This river cuts through a huge ravine in the right bank Kyiv plateau and accordingly divided the area into several levels. This part of the Syrets bank, where I am now, is the right bank of the Syrets, because once again we are learning to distinguish the banks of a river. Here flows the little river. We are looking downstream. On the right we have the right bank. On the left, accordingly, we have the left bank. There you go. So right now we are on the high right bank of the Syrets River, which leans toward the city center. It's also worth mentioning that this very river divides the city of Kyiv into two geographical zones. The right bank of the Syrets leans more toward the forest steppe zone, while the left bank belongs to the Policia zone. So right now we are on the right bank, the high bank, at about plus 80 meters above the level of the Syrets River, the Syrets stream, closer to the city center here, where even if God forbid or terrible dam built in Soviet times were to break, the Syrets would not flood this area, so you can rest assured. The right bank of the Syrets leans closer to the city center, to the ominous Babin Yar ravine, to Lukyanivka. And accordingly, this is the first Syrets. It is located on the hill. Lower Syrets is beyond the railway. There, in the little ravine, you can still see remnants. Vestiges of single-story private buildings of a rural type, which exist in stark contrast to the multi-story apartment blocks of the neighboring, actively developed districts. Especially in the area of the former flower farm, Flowers of Ukraine, where now an entire conglomerate, a whole town of new buildings is being constructed, something that personally I did not see during my childhood. Syretsky Recreation Park, where the children's railway used to run, was located on this right bank, on an elevation, right in the very heart of the original Syrets, not far from the Babin Yar ravine. And in old times, this river served as a kind of boundary, a sort of Rubicon between various social groups of the population. On the high banks, both on the right and the left, it was usually the wealthy who settled. Down below, right by the river, poor people settled because there were constant floods, various high waters, and the water accordingly would wash everything away and destroy it. And on the high banks, it was either the wealthy who settled there, all sorts of well-off people like the Seletskys or the banker Meyer, whose collection later became the basis for the famous dendrological park, as well as a great many different landowners. And on this bank, on the right one, army summer camps were located here. That's why even now, in the local street grid nearby, you can find streets like Taberna, streets like Artillery Lane, and Tiraspolska Street, which was associated with the Tiraspol Infantry Regiment. In other words, this was an area where, as a rule, the military would be stationed during the summer. They even had their own wooden church. And nearby, along Daitarivska Street, there was a railway line running all the way to Lukyanivka, to Kyiv. Jumping ahead a bit, I'll say that this railway, which was operational at the time and ran alongside what is now the Children's Railway, though that didn't exist yet, was something of a road of death, along which prisoners from the Syrets concentration camp were sent to oblivion shortly before Soviet troops liberated Kyiv from the Nazis. Today we'll talk in detail about the Syrets concentration camp. Of course, it's impossible to recount all the atrocities committed there by the Nazis against people, because YouTube simply couldn't handle such horrors. It would just ban my channel, plain and simple. But it's important to mention one crucial detail in advance. Probably in order to somehow stigmatize this area, or simply to create a solemn entrance to the park, a monument was erected at the entrance to Syrets Park of the Children's Railway during the wide-scale October celebrations, supposedly indicating that the Syrets concentration camp was located right here on the site of the park. This is not true. German aerial photography has been preserved, which allows us to clearly determine where the buildings of this terrible death institution were located. The grounds of the park today, which border the area, fortunately, were not part of this horrific torture site. Therefore, the park itself is located outside the boundaries of the Syrets concentration camp, although it is very close to it. Friends, tomorrow is the first day of summer. Can you already feel how hot it's gonna be? But for me, summer can be any day when I have Beshot Kavun with me. Beshot is a real boost of summer energy that fills me up and pushes me toward new creative ideas and achievements. The refreshing taste of watermelon is a must-have in the summer heat, as if it transports you from under the blazing sun to an oasis. I always have Beshot with me on shoots because its distinctive sound instantly gives me the signal. Now we're going to uncover new secrets of Kyiv and create a new video for you. Charged up? Now let's continue. As usual, friends, this has already become a classic in our episode, the segment Curious Reader's Corner. I brought some books with me, and today I'll be enlightening you, including with the help of literature, because books have been one of my passions since early childhood, you could say. As the teachers in kindergarten used to say about me, while other kids would bring dolls or toys to kindergarten, Stepans was already dragging along some huge tome to preschool. Yes, I learned to read very early, and obviously that somehow influenced my development. So I recommend everyone to read books. Read books in Ukrainian, make sure to keep developing yourself, become smarter, and discover something new every day. Even in such terrible conditions as we live in now, it is necessary to develop new neural connections and grow beyond yourself above all else, despite all the challenges. It's very interesting that the place we're describing today has become something like the forefather of Kyiv cinematography. And probably it's safe to say within all of Ukraine as well. So today we'll talk a little about that. Here I'm holding two books by the incomparable Kyiv experts Ayahor Odnopodzov and Syretsky Vakulishin, and I'll read you a few excerpts from them that are directly related to cinematography. The book by Ayahor Odnopodzov is called Syrets and Surroundings. Eventually the hamlets turned into dachas. They were rented out in the summer to wealthy Kyiv residents. One of these dachas was owned by a doorman. He was a doorman at the Continental Hotel. That's now the conservatory on Horodetsky, Tchaikovsky Street, the one that refuses to be renamed. By the way, write in the comments though, you think it's necessary to rename it to Tchaikovsky? Why not name it, for example, after Lysenko or Leontovich? For some reason, they stubbornly want Tchaikovsky. Well, I won't share my own opinions. So you write instead of me, leave a comment. Continental was a very luxurious hotel. Now it's the main central building of our conservatory on Maidan Nezalezhnosti on Horodetsky Street. So just imagine that the doorman of this hotel was able to buy a dacha in Syrets with his tip money. So in 1912 to 1913, the company Tim and Reinhard Osipov shot 3 films there. These were the first films made on the territory of modern Kyiv. They were Corpse number 1346, The Keys to Happiness, and How Beautiful, How Fresh the Roses Were. It was something like a mini Hollywood in Syrets, writes Ayahor Odnopodzov. But that's not all that Ayahor Vakulishin writes. Here, things get interesting both about cinema and about our aviation, which is connected to Syrets. As the artist once said, aviation is our pride. So, from Syretsky Vakulishin's book My Svyatoshin District, who hasn't heard of the world aviation pioneer Petro Nesterov? Unfortunately, the general public doesn't know that the famous aviator performed his loop-the-loop in the Svyatoshin forest. The sculptor Kavaleridze witnessed this unprecedented event. Kavaleridze's workshop a museum on Andriivsky descent. I highly recommend everyone to visit it. As is well known, this man was called the Ukrainian Michelangelo for his many talents. By the way, he was also involved in the creation of the first Ukrainian films. The sculptor Kavaleridze witnessed this unprecedented event. Back then, in 1913, he took part in the filming of a movie. A private film studio rented a summer house in Syrets, somewhere in the area of today's Dabki restaurant. It's not known for sure. Perhaps it was actually somewhere near Syretsky Park. So, after their honest work, the group of filmmakers set out into the field. The intoxicating scent of the grasses from the empty shooting range made their heads spin. The shooting range was actually somewhere nearby. Walking toward the setting sun, they ended up all the way near the military airfield. In his later years, Ivan Kavaleridze recalled the details of that evening. There was only one plane in the sky, but it was behaving strangely, oddly. It would gain altitude and then plummet straight down, then tilt to the side and pick up speed that way. Suddenly, the women cried out, "A crash!" The plane falling, it flipped its back. But what this? Is it flying upward? Yes, it climbed up and disappeared beyond the horizon as if it was what it was supposed to do. We couldn't believe it, but it happened right before our eyes. That is, when Kavaleridze was here at the Syrets Dachas, during the filming of the aforementioned movies, it was right here that Nesterov, the famous pilot, performed his legendary loop-the-loop. By the way, Nesterov is buried not far from here at the Lukyanivsky cemetery. So with your support, I will definitely make a video about this unique cemetery. Leave your comments, suggestions, likes, shares, everything needed so that as many people as possible can see this video. And at Lukyanivsky cemetery, by the way, my great-great-grandfather is also buried. So for me, it will be a special honor to make a video about him. Well, this is the fit part. And here is a memorial sign. By the way, I just remembered that I think this was installed in the early 90s. I even remember the architect's last name, Paskevich. At this place, although, no, it's Soviet, at this place, during the Nazi occupation, behind the bars of the Syrets camp, tens of thousands of Soviet patriots were tortured to death. Well, in short, as always, everything is very diverse. Some kind of patriots, though it doesn't specify exactly who. In reality, it was located not in the direction where the stone is, but rather in the opposite direction. Although, if you look at it, these people behind the symbolic bars are looking in that direction, so perhaps the monument has some hidden symbolism, but I'm not sure that those who created it actually knew where such a thing is really located. Well, I'm rather meticulous about such matters. Maybe yes, it's not that important on a global scale. It's good that at least people remember these sufferings, these sacrifices. But for us, for people who are at least somewhat connected to history like me, we still need to properly localize those places. During World War II, immediately after the city of Kyiv was occupied by the Germans, this Syrets concentration camp was established. There are also some mentions that certain structural elements from the old one were used, from the old army summer infantry camp in Syrets. At the same time, memoirists also recall, for example, that the barbed wire which surrounded this area where more than 3,500 people were held at various times was actually taken by the prisoners of the camp themselves. At the beginning of 1942, it was taken from the Kyiv Fortified District. Yes, by the way, I lied. The camp appeared at the beginning of 1942. The inhabitants of the camp, if they can be called that, more accurately, the prisoners lived in earthen dugouts. A separate dugout was occupied by the Jews, who were called the Heavenly Team, because as you can imagine, the Nazis did to the Jews what they did. The modern location of the camp starts from the special sanatorium type school. I remember back then we used to meet there. When we were still kids, we met girls from that school. Mostly there were children with a bad Mantoux test, meaning they were suspected of having tuberculosis. From that sanatorium school, the camp occupied the area of the ruins of the modern Gagarin cinema, meaning it stretched from Shusev Street. If you overlay the maps, it more or less matches up, give or take a few dozen meters. So it was outside the boundaries of the park. But on German aerial photos from 1943-1944, you can already see that on the territory of this parcours and the children's railway there is no vegetation at all. Everything has been cut down. It looks like a wasteland. This strongly supports the words of Zachar Trubakov, who in the 1990s, already in Israel, wrote the book The Mystery of Babin Yar, where he himself, as a prisoner of the Syrets concentration camp, describes how the Germans, for amusement, forced people to climb to the tops of trees while making others cut those trees down. As a result, the trees would fall and the people who were on top would be severely injured. In general, I highly recommend the literature. Of course, there's Kuznetsov's book Babin Yar. Another acquaintance of mine told me that she personally knew Volodymyr Davidov. He is one of the few who survived that terrible death camp. She says that Kuznetsov essentially appropriated these materials without permission and used them. In short, it was supposed to be a book by another author. And Davidov, he is one of those who miraculously survived Babin Yar right here, in the Sofiivka hamlet. That's right. And later, he gave testimony in absentia at the Nuremberg trials when he was not allowed to leave Kyiv to attend in person. He smiled broadly and said that if he had already managed to escape from the Syrets concentration camp, then probably, if he had wanted to, he could have escaped from the Soviet Union as well. Babi Yar, the book by Kuznetsov, and Secrets of Babi Yar by Zakhar Trubakov, as well as the book Babi Yar, People, Power, History. There is a large amount of documentary material, including interrogations of direct eyewitnesses to the events. If you want, you can, so to speak, experience for yourself, even if only a tiny fraction, just one small hundredth of what the prisoners of the Syrets concentration camp went through by reading the aforementioned books. And honestly, it just makes your hair stand on end. There was a commandant there, Paul von Radomski, a mentally ill person, clearly a sadist. And he committed such atrocities there that it would be hard to even imagine how inventive people can be when it comes to tormenting their fellow human beings. That's it. And now I'm going to stray a little from our route in a quiet little nook, a crevice on the Syretsky Heights. There is a charming chestnut alley. For many years, people have been trying to cut down this alley. Local residents are fighting for this alley, but it leads to a very little known cemetery where German prisoners of war are buried. There you have it. And then there's the Gagarin Cinema, built in 1967. As I understand it, the name is directly connected to the death of this cosmonaut. It was a large cinema, the local cultural center, with 1,000 seats, if I remember correctly. You can even see that some star-shaped decorative elements have remained. It fell into decline in the 90s. At first there was a wholesale market here, and then the Gagarin Club, or maybe the other way around, I'm not sure how it actually was. Well, and then it caught fire. For a long time, it was a very dense gathering place for all sorts of marginalized people. Well, now I see they've welded it shut, although maybe now I'll try to find a way around and get inside. Although the last time I was there, I honestly felt pretty disgusted. It was just, well, hell on earth. Piles of excrement, used stuff from all sorts of users of the stuff lying around. Well, anyway, that was its emergency exit. And from here, you can't see a thing. I should have brought a flashlight with me. And roughly speaking, which is very symbolic, from these bars further in, deeper towards Syretsky Park, all of that was the territory of the Syrets concentration camp. A branch of Sachsenhausen, if I remember correctly, the very camp where Stepan Bandera was once imprisoned. Well, that's just how it really is. It's a real shame. They could have, I don't know, at least built some kind of mall or something here. Everything just stands here, smells bad, and ruins the place. Well, you see over there, right here, is that boarding school. Well, a sanatorium type boarding school. And between them there's this, I call them the path of life, or trails for all sorts of crime thrillers, where on one side there's a fence, on the other side, and in the middle a narrow road. This is the kind of place you could shoot movies about muggings and all that sort of thing. YouTube doesn't like those words. Oh, right, we still have the higher 10-year school here. A very quiet, cozy chestnut alley. If we had come here a little earlier, the blossoms would have been fantastic. But even now, it's not bad. Here, the alley leads to the cemetery, which was restored at the expense of the Germans in the 90s. The thing is, right after the Germans were defeated, even before the end of World War II, in 1944, by Stalin's order, a parade was organized where about 40,000 German prisoners of war were marched through Kyiv. By the way, they were escorted by young guys recently mobilized with rifles loaded with blanks because they were actually afraid of provocations. And, well, in fact, the people of Kyiv reacted very differently. Some threw stones, while others gave a piece of bread or an apple. And according to legend, Hitler later recalled this event, saying something like, in his words, that Germans were driving Germans through Kyiv like mad dogs. That's it. And accordingly, right after the end of the war, they actually gathered them all, not even after the war ended, but after the liberation of Kyiv in different locations, there were about 60 camps for imprisoned Germans. And all of them accordingly worked on restoring the city infrastructure, building houses, the famous German houses, including in Syrets on the Shusev Street, where several blocks of these houses have been preserved. They built in Novodarnitsia, in Sotsmisto, in the Avarin settlement, and in Chokolivka. In many places, in very many places, in Starodarnitsia, these German settlements, in Aviamestechko, they are all scattered quite widely across Kyiv, so to speak. In other words, they were essentially repaid with the very thing they had come with. But, well, as is well known, this is one of humanity's main problems. Unfortunately, violence begets violence, and we will probably spend our whole lives running in circles like a hamster on a wheel, always wanting to do to our enemies exactly what they did to us. And they in turn will do the same to someone else or return it to us. And so on, and so on, and so on. And it will probably be like this until the end of the world, until our civilization disappears. Because after everything I've seen in our times, I still probably don't believe. I hardly believe in the triumph of reason. Even now, in times when you have a device in your pocket that if you had shown it 100 years ago, you would probably have been sent to prison. But nevertheless, well, friends, these are more like philosophical reflections. That's it. When the very last German forces finally left Kyiv, it was already well into the early 1950s, primarily because the Soviet Union did not officially ratify the Geneva Convention concerning prisoners of war, and consequently many of them were sadly left buried there. For example, Albert Schlaffen. The Germans themselves ended up in the Syrets concentration camp, and here they were buried just like garbage. And in this place, most of these buildings located nearby are built on German bones. The residents themselves also recall this. Here, cottages were given out by various factories, by the Artem factory, by the motorcycle factory. By the way, they were designed with consideration for how the Germans themselves lived, because the victors wanted to live like the vanquished. The houses of German peasant farmers or bowers were copied by the Ukrainian architect Holostenko and were actively built in various parts of Kyiv as housing for war veterans and party members. Here in Nivki, we had an entire settlement of old Bolsheviks. And these cottages here, in this case, on this little promontory that dominates over the Syrets ravine. From here, in fact, you can walk to the Syrets metro station in just a few minutes. It was right here that these cottages were built on German bones. They still stand there. A few were commemorated simply with a memorial. Well, some of the discovered bodies were identified, but most of those buried, I don't know how many there are. Hundreds or thousands never returned home. They still lie here somewhere beneath these little houses around us. And here I really like how, by the way, the residents of these very cottages slightly expand their plots. After all, the red line of the street used to run deeper in, but you see, they've made themselves a kind of buffer zone in height. Something new is always hidden behind fences. And it all starts with these moments, these little things, it would seem. They'll say, well, are you stingy or something? People do whatever they want. But if we live in a big city and everyone does whatever they want, it won't be a city, it'll just be chaos. So actually, as a person by nature, I'm a bit of a rebel myself. But if there are rules and everyone follows them, then everything will be good for everyone. But here you see, some people have appropriated a bit of land for themselves. There really were, wow, a huge number of different projects there. And may the people of Kyiv forgive me if they like this building. In my opinion, it was not the best option. That's my personal opinion, but still, it's become dear to us. It's been here for 100 years now. We'll be celebrating soon. It's a constant, and you have to come to terms with a constant. There's no other way. And in general, it's worth emphasizing that this entire park itself serves as a training base for Ukrzaliznytsia. Here, new personnel are being trained young, very young boys and girls who will go on to serve our most important and largest transport infrastructure artery in Ukraine, Ukrzaliznytsia, from which this colonial past needs to be removed. Southwestern. What southwestern? Southwestern in relation to whom? Central or Ukrainian, as far as I know, is one of the longest children's railways in Ukraine. I have been in particular to Kharkiv and Dnipro. I rode on children's railways there, but of course the Kyiv one is the most memorable for me. It's the road of childhood. The little train goes back and forth and around in a circle. It has been through a lot, repeatedly changing its configuration. As I already mentioned, there used to be a stop on the hospital grounds as well. In the 90s, there was a terrible decline, as evidenced by photos from that time, when almost all the rolling stock was out of service. Fortunately, now it looks much nicer. The only thing that bothers me a little is that the rails are rusty. As far as I remember, it was supposed to be operating already at the beginning of May. Or maybe I'm confusing it with June. But I know that earlier, in pre-war times, they used to launch and ceremoniously send off a steam locomotive, an old one that runs on coal. The railway was symbolically opened. Well, I always had the mischievous dream, which I'm going to share with you now. Of course, I don't recommend putting it into practice. I'll do for you, well, to climb onto the carriage and run along the roof while it's moving. And over there, on the opposite side, they made a beautiful fountain. There, on the opposite side, where the office center is now, right across from the park, there used to be another cultural institution. That's 7, Syretsky Park 7A. There used to be another builders club there. There was, I remember, a bike shop of the oldest in Kyiv. I used to come here for parts back in the day. And in general, the park has been really spruced up and cleaned. They've installed surveillance cameras here, because honestly, all sorts of trouble and let's say bad things used to happen. By the way, I apologize in advance if I'm focusing too much on myself in this episode. However, I hope you understand me correctly. These places truly resonate deeply with my memories and are an inseparable part of my life, my biography. As Vertinsky wrote, I remember every little stone here since childhood. It was here on the territory of the park that they built a little house. In the early 2000s, a plot was seized practically in the park zone. Well, that's just our reality. Let's at least politely thank them for not building it up completely. And that's all there is to say about that. Syretsky Park. Renovated. Budapest. Here is the depot where these little carriages rest and take a break. Entering the territory is prohibited. It used to be open. I have a bunch of photos from this area. Well, that's good, no need for all sorts of vandals to sneak in here. As one policeman said, he said they all gather there at the cemeteries, these vandals. I think he mixed up the words vandal and metalhead. Once, our Susanin, also known as Suprazus, was detained here. That's the kind of rolling stock exhibition you see here. Well, it's beautiful. It really is. And I won't pretend otherwise. Your hands are all covered in rust. Wow, what a smell of creosote. Such a unique sight. Of course, it's better to look at it when there are no leaves. This is the viaduct of the Kyiv Children's Railway, built back in 1953. As knowledgeable people have told me, these riveted beams used here as structural elements were supposedly taken as trophies brought from the fatherland, that is from Germany, and used on the children's railway. Considering that this was in 53, it's entirely possible. You can see how deep it is. This is one of the ravines of the Syretska Gully, one of its branches over which this viaduct was built, a grand viaduct. Perhaps once upon a time water flowed here, there was a stream, but obviously now it has become seasonal. There is a pipe there that comes out near the garages into the Syrets Valley, but the water flow through it is temporary. That's it. And here, on one of the supports, if you look closely, you can find the year it was built. I was off by a year, but still, as far as I remember, it was built in 53. See? Constructed in 54. It's just a unique thing. Some sensitive people, when there are no leaves, can't walk across it. It makes you feel dizzy, just like that. And this little ravine where this aqueduct is laid, well, I have some interesting comments from my longtime good friend Svetlana, who is an old resident of this area and describes in a very interesting way what happened here in the 80s. Now I will read you her memories. They are very relevant to this ravine, specifically to the place where I am right now. The viaduct of the children's railway. From time to time, we would attach an incredibly dangerous and long rope swing to its lower beam. Further down the ravine, in the backyard of the 9th hospital now, I think, it's the 12th, right? Maybe I'm mistaken. In 1987, The irresponsible hospital administration threw out furniture from the wards, linoleum, plastic curtains, and the concrete floors of the infectious disease unit, where the unfortunate people from Pripyat and the liquidators of the terrible Chernobyl disaster had stayed and died. At first, they naively tried to wash the infectious disease unit over and over. Then they removed the linoleum, the doors, and threw out the furniture. But since it was still highly contaminated, they dismantled the unit, leaving only the shell of the walls and the basement steps. Everything had to be written off and buried. But they took a simpler approach. Without spending extra money, they just dumped it all into the ravine right behind the morgue. It's a little further over there. Unused coffins were also thrown there, and they covered it all with a bit of earth. The heavy Kyiv rains quickly exposed all of this, and we, not being very smart Syrets kids, used the nightstands and beds to build ourselves forts, jumped around on the concrete slabs, played hide and seek, and lit campfires. Later, my friend, who had enrolled in the higher chemical university, out of curiosity stole a dosimeter from the lab and decided to measure everything around. Here's how it was. And this was our favorite hangout spot for the local youth. Away from prying eyes, you could study, smoke cigarettes, and kiss. How we measured it, how we ran away from there. Decades later, the truth came out about the dumped radioactive materials and furniture. And it was only in the 2010 S that all of it was collected and taken away somewhere. Now, on this spot, damp and gloomy place there, stands a tall new building, a newly built high-rise. Well, I mean, this Syretsky boyar, I don't know if it's boyar, boyarak, or boyar, because this bearded boyar from Muscovy, if it's a bearded boyar from Muscovy, then it definitely needs to be renamed. But I see that no one here, if we're carrying out active decommunization, it needs to be comprehensive. But what happens is this: streets renamed, government institutions renamed, but residential complexes taken by Znanky ladies, as convicts say yes, they take names they don't understand. For example, here in Biloki we have the Pavlenko residential complex. Who is Pavlenko? A local communist, organizer of the Holodomor and collectivization, or the Kurnativsky residential complex. Kurnativsky is being built in Voskresenka now, despite the fact that the street was renamed long ago to Ostafi Dashkevich, one of the founders of the village Voskresenska Slobitka. Or, for example, like on Hybokitska Street, there's this so-called Podilsky Posad. What kind of posad, for crying out loud? Posad, as far as I remember, is also purely a Tsarist thing. Sorry. Hopefully YouTube won't ban us. Let's hope so. Probably Boyas too. Well, I don't know. Maybe I'm confused. I'm not that much of a language expert. Write your opinion. It seems it closed down, but I always found that establishment in the park where, as you know, the 12th hospital is nearby. The cafe Black Doctor sounded really ominous because there's a hospital next door and such a name. Yeah. As I understand, it's no longer operating, although you can still smell food from there, so maybe it actually works for some special orders. Although someone once told me the Black Doctor is some kind of cheap, lousy booze. Well, I don't drink, so I'm basically a long liver. In recent years, I've been doing sports there, riding my bike, practicing hand-to-hand combat. And recently, I also started doing breathing exercises using the Wim Hof method, so I don't really know. Let me know what kind of booze that is. I don't even want to check. I mean, alcohol, of course. Anyway, according to Svetlana Bilozir's recollections, there should be radioactive deposits somewhere around here, and it's quite likely that they still exist here to this day. By the way, I once stayed in this scary infectious diseases hospital. As a child, I was constantly taken there with suspected appendicitis, but they never actually removed it. I was always getting food poisoning, eating everything in sight out of some kind of hunger, it seemed. Yeah. That's what they call compulsive overeating in psychiatry, right? And I was constantly being taken in for poisonings. But this time, they put me in the infectious diseases hospital, and I spent the whole day lying there with two boys who just reeked of vinegar. Their body temperatures were so high. Whole medical consiliums would come to see them. They had some terrible infectious meningitis. How did I not get sick there? I don't know, maybe meningitis isn't actually contagious, I'm not sure either. Write in the comments whether meningitis is contagious. But still, I spent more than a day with them. Then they moved me from there, and after that I ended up running away. That infectious disease hospital, every time I walk by it, I remember this. And then when I read Sherbak's book about Chernobyl, I also learned for the first time that they brought people there. Back then, it was still the 25th hospital. At one time, it had been moved from the Pokrovsky Monastery. They brought liquidator doctors and people evacuated from the Chernobyl zone there. Well, I don't know, I should have gotten a dosimeter somewhere. Maybe these stones are radioactive too, actually. They built it right at the bottom of one of the ravines. Well, maybe it's a nice residential complex, but you see, the locals tell such scary stories here about how everything is saturated with radiation and there are still some boulders lying in the bushes over there. I don't know, we can go close and take a look. Who knows what it is? Who knows what, friends? Right here, for example. These are quite possibly fragments of that very dismantled hospital building because the hospital is located just above us. So if I now... Oh! That's all of it. There's some linoleum over there. All of this was thrown out. It's radioactive, so it's still lying here even now. Well, I guess I really need to, in the future, probably start a fundraiser for a dosimeter, buy a dosimeter, and go around taking measurements in places like this for the videos. As I understand it, if I follow this path now, I'll come out right at the hospital, since there's stuff lying around over there. The hospital was built sometime in the 70s, and as far as I know, before that there was a children's railway stop here. One of the little stops. The asphalt here is the same kind. It's very slippery. Oh, I'm about to fall. It'll be just like that funny moment in the video about Kyiv. Turns out, everyone really liked it. My improvised fall, haha, into the abyss. Yeah. Looks like we're already on the hospital grounds. Ah, that's the morgue. That's the morgue right there. Everything is just as Vitlana described as a scary hospital. I don't know if that's true or not. Someone once joked to me that in swampy Russian, it supposedly translates as the place of final registration of citizens. And right behind it is this Syretsky Boya, the morgue, and right behind it is the Syretsky ravine. And I was told that right here on the hospital grounds they made a cemetery. Now we're gonna look for it. And I also know there's a huge bomb shelter here. We used to go in there. It was still abandoned and sealed up. There was a bunch of all sorts of interesting Soviet civil defense stuff gas masks. Basically all kinds of atmospheric junk like that. And maybe now it would actually be really useful to repurpose it. Oh, there's a little chapel here, see? On the grounds, a bell. Ukrainian Orthodox Church. They made a cemetery here. Mother Alipia's. Her ancestors. So, are they trying to say that the remains of Alipia herself are buried here? Well, as I understand it, these are cenotaphs. Did Mother Alipia really live on donations from Irinavait, Australia? I don't remember there ever being a cemetery here, to be honest. Right here on the grounds, the first parishioners of the church, we remember. Well, this is probably a cenotaph. Pavel, did Alipia really come to this hospital, the famous Holosivska prophetess? But Holosiv is one place and Syrets is another, isn't it? Garden of remembrance for the departed. It's just a memorial garden, not a cemetery. Mother Alipia and her ancestor, Alipia's ancestors, Tikhon, Vasya. Well, they are generally in Moldova, as far as I understand. Alipia's parents. Among Moldovans, remembrance is very common. Aha, yes, exactly. Once, my mom rented out the apartment to some acquaintances right after my grandfather had passed away. And I don't want to. I'm there. I'm actually, a cosmopolitan. I'm not a racist, not a chauvinist, and not even a nationalist. Like, whoever tries to stick that label on me, I'm actually against labels in general. Anyway, they didn't pay and ran off after a couple months. But when I was going through their things, the ones they left behind when they fled, there were, honestly, friends, not to exaggerate, probably 30 or 40 icons of Alipia of various sizes. Well, that was a lesson for my mother, too. She should have rented out the apartment legally, paid taxes and all that, signed a contract. Then they wouldn't have been able to get away from us. But since she did it under the table, that's exactly how it came back to her. Damn, just imagine. It's still the 9th hospital, the head. How could I have mixed that up? Right, the 12th hospital is actually on Pidvisatskaho. In the infectious diseases ward, you can only communicate with relatives through the window, like in prison. At that particular time, this truly bothered me deeply, a quintessential mama's boy. a mama's precious little scratch, a mama's cherished little bead. They wouldn't let me see my mom when I was a child. But unfortunately, there are these gray spots in this park, abandoned, neglected sites of our mismanagement. By the way, for some reason, a lot of them are concentrated right in the area of the former Babin Yar, the Syrets concentration camp. What is this? Some kind of negative energy is connected to suffering and death? Or is it simply the course of events and, in fact, nothing more than the negligence of those who are supposed to be responsible for this? You've probably all seen its former Shamerlo on the street in Syrets Park. It really spoils the appearance of the renovated park. The former shower complex. In general, this Soviet obsession, they used to call a swimming pool a shower complex. Maybe people called it a pool, but officially it was called a shower complex on paper. This obsession really with calling everything a kombinat. You know what they were called? For a certain period in the Soviet Union, kindergartens were called children's kombinat. So to build socialism, they needed kombinat, even for the production well, for the making of children. A huge shower complex, Chaika, stands abandoned. People only remember it from time to time after elections, actually. Before elections, sorry. After elections, they forget about it. And accordingly, they promise that just now, just a little longer, and we'll restore it. Everything will be done properly, but the elections pass, and everyone forgets about the pool, although in reality the building is grandiose. Here, in this area, as far as I know, only on Salsky Street is there a pool, but it's small. For example, Miroslava, our regular excursion attendee and longtime acquaintance, said that to get into this pool, you have to sign up so far in advance, almost a month ahead, and there are only 3 lanes. And here, such a treasure just stands idle and nobody cares, as they say. Well, now we're gonna go inside. It's been welded shut many times, but the structure is so massive, probably even larger in size than that famous pool in the ghost town of Pripyat. Although in the 90s, as seen in a photo from Ihor Rodnopozov's archive, everything actually looked pretty decent. By the way, there's another unfinished pool very close to this one, located about a kilometer away on the grounds of KIMO, the Kyiv Institute of International Relations. There's a dormitory there. Well, as expected, here are the typical views you find in places like this. God, it's been so long since I was last here. Probably about 10 years. When I lived in Nivki, I used to come here all the time for walks. We used to sneak into this pool all the time. This is what the structure looks like. It was built sometime in the late 1960s. You see, honestly, if it were restored right now, it actually looks in places like some kind of a Mayan jungle or the abandoned cities like Machu Picchu. So where else do we have abandoned pools? There's an abandoned pool at NAU, I remember for sure, on the campus. The pool at the factory, the radio factory on Boryspilska, as far as I remember, also isn't functioning properly. That's a shame. It really is a shame. People could go there to improve their health, and it could also make money. I think there would probably be a lot of people interested. New buildings are constantly being constructed nearby. I was watching the Pink Floyd video for Marooned. There's a pool in Pripyat that looks about the same, just smaller actually. But foreigners are also fascinated by it. We have even bigger pools here. But for some reason, Pink Floyd doesn't shoot their videos here. Someone tell them to come and film here. Maybe that way, at least, we'll be able to promote this poor pool somehow. And people will remember it for more than just city council elections. Although, maybe, maybe someone else has shot some music videos or movies here, write about it in the comments too. I'm really curious. Although I haven't really come across any. Maybe some amateur ones? As for the residential architecture of Syrets, I want to draw your attention to it now. There's a very small block here on Syretsky Parkova Street, formerly Shamriva, with these Baroque gables and very rich floral ornaments on the entrance groups. Oh, I'm about to start sounding like some pretentious architecture expert. So basically this is the entrance group. That up there is the little gable, and on these columns we can see floral ornaments. So similar houses were built by the architect Dobrovolsky. Well, they were designed by him, but it was German prisoners of war who actually built them. You can see their work in Diverzeve, for example. There's a whole block of them on Baichuka Street. And here, in Syrets, and even on Kreshatik, all of this is the work of Anatoly Dobrovolsky. So here, there is even a small trace of the work of the famous architect who restored post-war Khreshchatyk after World War II. And the neighboring buildings, like this one here, it slightly follows the curved outline of the street, and the neighboring Stalin-era building also features ornaments. There's an observation tower on top. There it is. I once climbed up there. That's how things are on our planet. Great fences, such high-quality Stalin-era buildings. You can even take a little peek a bit into this corner, this little gap, and then stroll on, continue walking to the park. We still have a few very important sites left here, and we'll finish our journey with them. Well, you see, this is a typical Stalin-era courtyard. In fact, there's only one Khreshchatyk-style building here. Dobrovolsky's, here it is, on the right. By the way, while planning something, I even bought a collection of poems by Volodymyr Zakiloviter, who lived here in our heart on Riska Street number 18. I bought his poetry collection on the occasion, considering that soon we will be fellow townsmen. Well, of course, he's already in the kingdom of heaven. Theoretically, we could have lived next to each other. Well, in general, I'll make a separate video about the neighborhood at some point, but it's cool here. I really love all sorts of places with history, establishments that can boast about having existed for a certain period of time, and of course, that gives them a certain kind of publicity. Well, could have, right? For example, this furniture store has been around for a very long time. See, warehouse store. And above, the sign furniture is broken. More than 60 furniture manufacturers. Store number 9, furniture. This is behind the scenes of Shuseva Street. There's a little shop here, like this. Well, first of all. Secondly, a bit further on, there's a more modern cafe, but I really like the name too. It's quite telling. Cafe Neolith. They probably have, well, some kind of beer there. Pithecanthropuses gather there, right? They discuss their pressing matters there, like that. Actually, I wanted to show you the Shusev buildings, these German-style houses. It's very, very cozy here, I would say. But the only thing is, Oceano, the condition of some individual buildings is bad, I'd say. There are even, I don't know, some mosaics there. Ooh, nice! A sign that says gas. Wow! By the way, there was a memorial plaque hanging here recently, which someone decommunized, as I understand it, without the city authorities' approval. And they removed the inscription Shusev and so on. But they left a small strip at the bottom mentioning, so to speak, his main achievement in life. He is, as is known, Ukrainian by origin, but the author of the famous Lenin Mausoleum, that satanic shrine near the Kremlin. And by the way, this street still hasn't been decommunized. Back in the 1950s, when the German settlement was being built, residents complained that it was very difficult to get to it. But once they filled in the top of Babin Yar, it naturally became easier. And in 1960, the 16th trolleybus started running, which still goes there today. You can get all the way to Maidan Nezalezhnosti. I remember, as kids, we used to happily take it to the old Maidan to go roller skating. This is its depot. Oh, even the old furniture is still here. No one uses it. Unbelievable! Vintage furniture from the old depot, or rather the dispatcher's office, not the depot, but the dispatcher's office. Maybe they're planning to open a cafe or something. There you go. And right here, yeah. And we used to get on at the start of the 23rd and ride from Nivki to here. We'd get on the 16th here and ride all the way to Maidan. They had such delicious hot dogs there. Probably the first ones in Kyiv. That was back in '98, before Maidan was renovated. Now there's some kind of channel there, something like that anyway, in that spot. So recently, a lady posted a photo of what that club looked like in the 50s, and we argued for a long time about whether such a club, its old version, could have even existed here in Kyiv. I said there weren't any clubs like that, since I'm kind of an expert on this topic. Plus, I consulted with Ihor Nopodov, who wrote a book. Both of us, so to speak, were very puzzled by this photo and thought that the lady was simply confusing something because so much time had passed. But then it turned out, she informed us that this club was on Shuseva Street. And that's when the picture came together for me. This club that's here now is actually just a new building of the old builders club that used to be here. And there was another one nearby on what is now Syretsky Parkova Street, then called Chamrilo. There was another builders club. Well, in these old German houses, they mostly settled all sorts of builders apparently. That's why they were given. That's why there were several clubs here at once where they could relax. Some of the old shops are still left. Maxim Berlinsky Street is named after one of the very first Kyiv historians. The old grocery store has been preserved. It's still lively. A little further, Just around the corner there's a small library, also pretty cool in that Stalinist architectural style. Well, we once filmed a full-length video specifically about the Syretsky neighborhood and all its attractions. For now, I'm only interested in those places that are directly located near our children's railway. Yeah, even the ramp looks tired. Yeah, actually, even though Syrets is quite close to the city center, all these little houses here, unfortunately, are so neglected. These courtyards are so cluttered. But at least it's green. What's great is that it's green. There's a lot of greenery. It's mostly low-rise buildings here. Everything looks harmonious. If only it could be spruced up a bit, taken care of. If they could find a good caretaker. See this parade? No, well, something is being done. Look, they're laying a bit of asphalt here. Tronco Prohovoronko, there you go. And now we're heading with you to the Gagarin Cinema. Once a local deputy was running for city council, and they came up with a very creative slogan that I liked. They said, Gagarin is coming back. Like, referring to the cinema. Well, and I guess it was meant as a play on words, talking about the cosmonaut, but he never came back. Probably got stuck somewhere in orbit or was abducted by aliens. But nevertheless, the cinema still exists there. So we'll walk down one side. Once, when I was young and romantic, I had, so to speak, a friendly group here. Probably with some kind of platonic, unfulfilled love. I wrote poems. Several of these poems are dedicated specifically to this park. Maybe I'll publish them someday. I wrote a lot of poems, even some collections were published there. I self-published them and distributed them among my acquaintances. But this park was a source of my inspiration during my passionate youth, when there was still no clear focus in life, and you have no idea who you are, what you are, or how you are. There are no life guidelines at all, but the soul longs for something extraordinary. To be honest, I wouldn't want to go back there. I like my current self much more now. That's it. And finally, the last, very important, and I would say without exaggeration, significant site associated with the park is located right next to it. This is the so-called Desyatirichka. It's a complex of schools with a special focus. Young talents are nurtured there, sprouting like seeds in good soil. Sorry for such, perhaps, inappropriate comparisons. Now we'll head over there, just pass by quickly. There are quite a few interesting and diverse buildings there. And overall, the place is very significant and important for our city. What's this here? A school? Oh, there used to be a vintage glass collection point here. It burned down. I see. No, definitely musicians, definitely artists. I think there's also vocals or something like that. And I think there's also a dormitory for foreigners. I used to be good friends with two girls here. Red-headed twins. Be sure to write in the comments if you remember the year 2009 or 2008. There were these two red-headed twins who played music in the metro. One played the violin, the other played... What is that pipe called? Boarding house? Oh my. A boarding house. Just like Bronia Prokopievna had. On full board. Well, tell me, and I'll say it. Flute. Oh. Anyway, they were making really good money. There was such a scene there that the cops were always raiding the place. But, nevertheless, well, let me tell you, the people who studied and lived in that dormitory, as they say, audacity is the second kind of luck. They were probably the happiest people on the planet because they were so shameless, so adaptable, it was almost scary. By the way, up there in the dormitory, they actually managed to save the mosaic. I thought it was done for. They didn't cover it up, and thank goodness for that. By the way, it's a flutist that's depicted here. Anyway, those two red-haired girls were kind of making fun of me. So in the end, I told them to get lost. They said that men would constantly come from the park at night, peek into their windows, and do all sorts of things there, including exhibitionism. All of this means exhibition in English, and you know the derivative word exhibitionism. And one time I came over to visit them and found a pack of strike cigarettes. By then I wasn't smoking anymore, I had quit. I was probably I started very young and fortunately quit very young as well. And by the time I went to study at the institute, I was about 18 or 19, I had already quit smoking. And I'm holding this pack of strike cigarettes. Someone comes up to me and says, hey, give me a cigarette. And basically they all swarmed me and took them like vultures. They thought, that I was some kind of sucker with expensive cigarettes, just handing them out. But honestly, I didn't care and I wasn't sorry about it. But their pushiness, when people, let's say, misunderstand you a bit, it seems like they think you're some kind of fool, not just a kind person. So, yeah, it's a very interesting place here. Talented young people are studying here. So there are choreographers after all. I told you, it's a choreographic college. Basically, their purpose, it's basically like a regular school. But here, In addition to acquiring general knowledge, they also gain special skills to continue their studies. This is the concert hall designed by architect Budilovsky, who later designed the Obolon district. He even received some kind of award for this building, although from the outside it looks, well, let's say, debatable, controversial. I remember back when I was young, I had a lot of foolishness in me. I used to climb up these things, somehow holding onto the sides, bracing my feet, and making my way to the top. I'm curious if I could manage something like that now, or is it all over for me? There's no more gunpowder left in the powder flasks. Well, let me check. It looks something like this. I don't know how dry my feet are, or if they're not dry. Oops. Listen, I could probably climb up here. I just need gloves. I think I just need gloves. So that's a task for the future. Well, that's for me. Today, our format is more of a live one, with walks. Hi! So, what's up? Is this yours? Whose are you? Or have you been left to fend for yourself? Here, this thing. In short, the task is to roof it next time. Well, that's for some time later. There will be calmer times. This is Mavach. Hit the like button if you studied here. These are choreographers, artists, musicians. The word like, I saw someone. For some reason it makes them nervous, unsettles them. Really, they say, why do you say that? What do you mean? Like, there's no such word. There isn't. Did I make it up myself? Or what? That it doesn't exist? I want to be this, a meme generator. We need to create our own memes, Ukrainian memes, Kyiv memes. Dear Republic of Crimea. Okay, stop. Crimea is a republic that was established before Ukraine's independence. We observe, we learn, while having fun. Such details were unknown to me. By the way, as far as I remember, the old rails were wooden, not the rails, but the sleepers. They had such a pleasant smell of creosote. Yeah. The Kyiv Industrial College is also located nearby here. Let us remember it, mention it with a quiet word. Well, now I'm crossing the Aviotis Viaduct. I always mix up the words aviaduct and viaduct. Aqueduct comes from aqua water. Viaduct is just via agra, via gra. The vocal instrumental ensemble, GRA. Do you remember that one? The girls were all naked, showing off. Traffic movement passage is prohibited. So how are we supposed to walk here, folks? I've even ridden a bicycle here more than once. The first times were scary. Especially when people are coming towards you. There are these little balconies here for safety balconies. Ooh-hoo-hoo-hoo-hoo. That's it. I really hope you enjoyed this episode. I hope you didn't waste your time watching my stories and pictures. I strongly urge you to subscribe to this wonderful channel if you haven't already, because as you've probably noticed, we simply don't have any bad videos here by default. Every video is great. You can support with a donation if you're interested in doing so, as long as it doesn't hurt your wallet or your financial support for our glorious armed forces of Ukraine. There's a pinned comment below in the description under this video. Donations can be made through various systems. Please, don't hesitate to send them. Recommend this video to someone if you liked it, maybe to your neighbors. It's a must-watch for all residents of Syrets and the Syretsky district as a whole. We need at least the population of one administrative district of Kyiv to subscribe to our channel. Well, and within a week, you always ask when is the next video coming out. I meet subscribers on the streets. It's always very pleasant. Don't be shy. Come up and say hi. If you want to tell me something personally, I'm an open person and always happy to chat with you. That's it. People ask, sir, when is the new video? Our videos always follow the same schedule. 6 p.m. Saturday every week. So we'll see you on your screens very soon. Thank you for watching. Wishing everyone peaceful skies. May God protect you. See you very soon, in a week. Thank you all.